Are you ready to revolutionize your relationship with money? Welcome to the Finding Financial Freedom podcast with the Frugal Physician, where I, Dr. Disha Spath, will be your companion on this exciting adventure. Get ready to conquer debt, build wealth, and embrace a mindful spending lifestyle that will empower you to live life on your own terms. Pearson Ravitz' story begins with Dr. Stephanie Pearson, a passionate OB-GYN at the height of her career. But then, a shoulder injury struck during a precipitous delivery. Her dreams were shattered, leaving her unable to practice medicine. Determined to make a difference, Stephanie became an advocate for her peers, guiding them through the complex disability process. Alongside insurance expert Scott Ravitz, Stephanie founded Pearson Ravitz, a company determined to approach insurance differently. Together, they set their mission to educate and empower physicians to protect their most valuable asset, their income, and the most important people in their life, their family. Today, Pearson Ravitz serves the medical community in all 50 states. At Pearson Ravitz, they understand the unique concerns of physicians. Physician-founded and physician-focused, Pearson Ravitz builds human connections before they create quotes. Life can change in an instant. It's hard to imagine that a sudden illness or injury could leave you and your family in a devastating financial situation. But with a little planning and guidance, you can prepare for every possibility. Visit PearsonRavitz.com to schedule your consultation with a Pearson Ravitz advisor. Welcome to another episode of Finding Financial Freedom with the Frugal Physician. I'm your host, Dr. Disha Spath, and today we're diving into the fascinating world of finance with a historical twist. So sit back, relax, and let's get started. Have you ever wondered how the financial system of the United States was established? Well, let me take you back on a journey back in time, inspired by none other than Alexander Hamilton. Yes, you heard me right, the same Alexander Hamilton who has taken Broadway by storm. Now, you might be thinking, what does a musical have to do with our financial system? Quite a lot, actually. Alexander Hamilton was more than just a founding father. He was the first Secretary of the Treasury and the mind behind the creation of the Federal Reserve System, or the Fed as we commonly know it. Okay, so I may be a little obsessed with Hamilton, the hit Broadway musical. What a fantastic way to present a story that seemed a little dry in history class, right? Alexander Hamilton was amazing in many regards. He came to this country as an immigrant, with nothing in his pockets and only his top-notch brain. While watching the musical, and knowing that he was the first Secretary of the Treasury under the new Constitution of the brand new United States of America, I couldn't help but wonder at the details of how he actually handled our financial situation. Turns out, he was the mind behind the creation of the Fed. It's hard not to hear about the Fed if you've been listening to any financial news recently. During the COVID pandemic and the resultant shutdown, the federal government had to take drastic measures to keep the economy alive. They pumped lots of money into people's pockets, even though they left doctors out, which had the desired effect of keeping businesses and households functioning. The stock market also recovered nicely. But all that extra money had the expected result of raising inflation. Each dollar was now worth less. So that's when the Fed stepped in. The Fed, or the Federal Reserve, is the central bank of the United States and regulates monetary policy by influencing money supply and interest rates. The Federal Reserve, while not his direct creation, was the brainchild of our friend Alexander Hamilton. Alexander Hamilton fathered the first bank of the United States. So why did he think it was such a big deal to form some sort of a central banking entity? Well, after the War of Independence, the new nation's leaders faced high inflation, a mountain of war debt to pay back, and stagnating commerce and industry, much like the pandemic. The country needed an institution to collect taxes, pay its bills, and affect monetary policy. So Alexander Hamilton advocated for and succeeded in creating the first Bank of the United States, ironically, modeled after the Bank of England. I mean, why hurl their good ideas into the sea along with the tea? There was resistance to a central federal bank, as you can imagine, from the states' rights advocates, most prominent of whom was Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson thought the central bank would favor financiers and industrialization instead of the agrarian, state-based society he had in mind. But George Washington signed the first bank into existence with a charter of 20 years. The first bank acted as a commercial bank, collecting revenues, making loans, and printing money. Its notes were backed by substantial gold reserves. Since it was the largest bank, it could influence the economy by altering the money supply and the credit in the economy. But when the first bank's 20-year charter expired in 1811, Thomas Jefferson had reached the height of his influence as America's third president, and another opponent to the bank, Thomas Madison, was now the president. Alexander Hamilton had passed in that fateful duel with Aaron Burr in 1804. Sadness. With its champion gone, the first bank's charter was allowed to expire, and banking was mostly taken over by state banks. But time went on and people started to notice the absence of a central banking authority. When financial panics happened, people tended to rush to banks and withdraw all their money. The problem is that banks don't keep all their money liquid. They make money by lending out money to other people, so they don't always have cash on hand to give to customers if they all request their money from the bank at the same time. Banks needed emergency reserves. Think emergency fund. There needed to be some entity to regulate this and lend banks money when they were in trouble. And thus, the idea of the first bank started to look good again. In 1913, the Federal Reserve was then created. Unlike the first bank that acted as a central federal bank dealing with consumers itself, the Fed was structured as a bank for the banks. It lends money to and otherwise deals with other banks to maintain price levels and long-term growth, tame inflation, and encourage full employment in the economy. It's comprised of the Board of Governors and 12 regional Federal Reserve banks. It meets 8 times a year to set monetary policy, and it reports to the Congress, not the executive branch.
Forget the burdens of tenants and toilets. Equity Multiple simplifies your investment journey, letting you invest passively in vetted, professionally managed commercial real estate. Only 5% of reviewed investments reach Equity Multiple's platform, with their asset management working on each from funding through exit to maximize your returns. Whether you're on the couch in your exec chair or the backseat of a ride share, Equity Multiple brings cash-flowing real estate investments straight to your fingertips. All investments involve risk. Visit equitymultiple.com to learn more.
The Fed's main tools to affect money supply and interest rates are manipulating the reserve requirement, the discount rate or federal funds rate, open market operations, and excess reserve deposits. So I know a lot of that probably sounds like a whole bunch of goobly-goop to doctors, but we often hear of the Fed raising or lowering interest rates, right? It's all over the news. People think this is the mortgage rate that they're raising or lowering, but that's not exactly right. The interest rate being referred to here is the federal funds rate, which is the interest rate charged from the Fed to the banks that will ultimately make the mortgage loans. So currently, the federal funds rate is set to 5.25 to 5.5%. So when the federal funds rate rises, the banks increase their prime rates that they offer to their consumers to keep a profit margin. So the federal funds rate indirectly affects lending rates charged to consumers and businesses. In 2008, during the Great Recession, and in 2020 at the beginning of the COVID pandemic, the Fed lowered the funds rate to 0% to help keep the economy from sinking into a recession. That's when the lucky amongst us got those 2 and 3% mortgage rates. When the executive branch then increased spending in 2020-2021, sending out stimulus checks, inflation began to rise. So the Fed counteracted that by raising the funds rate to decrease the money supply and keep inflation in check. So the dollars in your pocket may still buy the same things they do today, tomorrow. So the federal funds rate is the rate at which banks borrow money from the Federal Reserve. Why do banks need to borrow money from other banks at all, you might be asking? One reason is the reserve requirement. So we talked about how bank runs really sank banks in the past and that therefore they needed an emergency fund or a reserve requirement. Since the Fed is the bank of banks, it can require certain things from regional banks like keeping a reserve. So the Fed requires a certain percentage of deposits to be liquid in the form of cash at banks, usually around 10%. The rest they can lend out to others and use as money-producing assets. But day to day, when people make withdrawals from their accounts, or when loans are made out or repaid, the capital held by banks fluctuates. Banks often need to borrow money overnight from the Feds to meet the Federal Reserve requirement. That's why the federal fund rate matters on a daily basis to banks. That's how much interest they have to pay on the loan that they're taking from the Fed. So that's the federal funds rate. The Fed can also manipulate the economy by increasing or decreasing the reserve requirement. For example, at the beginning of the pandemic, when the economy was looking bleak, the Fed reduced the reserve requirement to 0 to free up cash in the economy. I also mentioned a couple of other ways the Fed regulates monetary policy. Open market operations refer to the Fed buying and selling treasury bills and bonds to affect the money supply. So if the Fed is looking to decrease the amount of money in the market, it sells treasury bills to the open market and therefore takes cash out from the open market. That decreases the money supply and interest rates increase. If the Fed's trying to ease market conditions, it will buy treasury bills, which increases the cash in the open market. Another way the Fed can affect banks is by increasing or decreasing the interest it pays banks on the reserve balance they have to maintain with them. So obviously, they can give them more money on the balance, just like our CDs or high-yield savings accounts, and that helps the banks increase their cash flow. Right, so that's a lot of information. I wanted to share that with you today because we often attribute how the economy is doing to just the executive branch, but there's a lot more to it, as you can see. The president can definitely affect the economy through fiscal policy. The executive branch can increase or decrease spending to manipulate the economy. The Congress also plays a role and affects fiscal policy by increasing or decreasing taxes and changing tax incentives. But the Fed was created as a third party, ultimately reporting to Congress, but not the president, to make monetary policy. The Fed is charged with helping keep our economy out of trouble by keeping inflation in check and the job market healthy. As you have seen in the last 4 years, the system of checks and balances has really worked, and we have survived COVID economically in a fantastic fashion. Inflation measured by the Consumer Price Index dropped to 3% from a high of 9% in June of 2022. Thanks must go to the Congress, to the executive branch, and the Fed for making this happen. And also, thanks must go to Alexander Hamilton for handling our financial situation and masterminding the systems that help get us through the biggest worldwide upheaval we have seen in quite some time. Or in Alexander Hamilton's words, the tendency of a national bank is to increase public and private credit. The former gives power to the state for the protection of its rights and interest, and the latter facilitates and extends the operations of commerce among individuals. Industry is increased, commodities are multiplied, agriculture and manufacturers flourish, and herein consists the true wealth and prosperity of a state. Thank you for joining me on this fascinating journey through history and finance on Finding Financial Freedom with a Frugal Physician. I hope you enjoyed learning about Alexander Hamilton's lasting impact on our financial system and how his vision continues to guide us today. If you found today's episode insightful, be sure to subscribe and leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform. Your feedback helps us bring you more content that empowers you on your path to financial freedom. Don't forget to follow us on social media for the latest updates and additional tips on frugality, financial health, and more. Together, we can achieve financial freedom. Until next time, I'm Dr. Disha Spath, reminding you to make every penny count. And as always, stay curious, stay informed, and most importantly, stay frugal, y'all. See you next time. At Pearson Rabbits, they understand that life can change in an instant. It's hard to imagine that a sudden illness, injury, or catastrophic event could put you and your family in a devastating financial situation. Physician-founded and physician-focused, Pearson Rabbits builds human connections before they create quotes. Visit www.pearsonrabbits.com today and embark on your journey to safeguarding your future.
The content shared on this podcast should not be taken as individualized financial advice. We are here to share our knowledge and experiences, but it is crucial to consult with professionals such as accountants, financial advisors, or attorneys who can provide personalized guidance based on your specific needs.